A financial advisor is standing in front of a room, holding up a coffee cup. He tells the crowd that this cup, bought every morning, is the reason they are not rich. Skip it, he says. Invest the money instead. And by retirement, you would have hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting in the bank. The room nods. Someone in the back writes it down. This idea became one of the most repeated pieces of financial advice in the world, but there is something quietly wrong with it. It is called the Latte Factor. The pitch is simple enough to fit on a napkin. That small daily habit, the coffee, the takeout, the subscription you forgot about, is secretly bleeding you dry. Cut it out, invest the difference. And decades from now, you retire wealthy, just from saying no to one $5 cup of coffee a day. For years, that idea was treated as the missing key to financial freedom. Here's how the story went. People who stay broke are not victims of anything. They are just leaking money on small pleasures without noticing. Fix the leak, and the wealth builds itself. It built an entire genre of personal finance content around one number, the price of a latte. Except when economists actually ran the math on real households, it mostly fell apart. The idea itself was real, and it did come from somewhere specific. It was coined by a financial author named David Bach in a book called The Automatic Millionaire, published in 2004. Bach told a story about a young woman who insisted she had no money to save. He asked her to walk him through her daily spending, and there it was. Coffee, a muffin, small charges that added up to several dollars a day without her noticing. At first, Bach was not selling a universal formula. He was making a narrow point about a specific person's blind spot. He believed most people underestimate how small, repeated purchases quietly drain a budget, and that becoming aware of them was a useful first step toward saving. The famous part came later. The math got extracted from his one story and turned into a general rule. If you take that $5 daily coffee and invest it instead, compounded over 40 years at a reasonable market return, you get a number that looks enormous. Some versions of the pitch put it well past $1 million. That is the moment a small anecdote turned into a formula for the American dream, because it told people something they desperately wanted to hear, that wealth is not about your salary, or your rent, or the cost of your health insurance. They will tell you it is about discipline, the willpower to skip small pleasures today so that a fortune waits for you later. That is a comforting idea. It puts your financial future entirely back in your own hands, and it quietly tells people who are already comfortable that their comfort was earned one skipped coffee at a time. So the Latte Factor spread everywhere. Financial gurus built seminars around it. Banks put it in brochures. Parents told their kids to skip the coffee shop and start a retirement account instead. Bach himself built an entire career on the idea, and later books doubled down on the same promise. Small daily choices, compounded over a lifetime, were the real engine of wealth, something anyone could control, no matter their paycheck. There was just one problem, hiding in the math itself. Look at what the calculation actually assumes. It assumes that $5 a day, saved without fail, for 40 straight years, gets invested immediately, in the market, at a steady return, with no missed months, no emergencies, no dips. It assumes the only thing standing between an ordinary person and a comfortable retirement is a coffee habit, and it quietly skips over the actual biggest expenses in most people's lives: rent, healthcare, childcare, debt, wages that have not kept up with the cost of living. You cannot fix a hole in the bottom of a boat by bailing out one cup of water at a time. For years, almost nobody stress tested this against real household budgets. Then researchers and financial writers started actually running the numbers against how people spend. In 2017, personal finance writer Helaine Olen and several economists pointed out something simple. For a lot of households, cutting out coffee entirely would free up somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 a year. Meanwhile, the average cost of rent, healthcare, or a single medical emergency can wipe out that same amount in a single month. They rebuilt the comparison, but honestly this time, instead of one guilt trip about coffee, they lined up small daily spending against the actual largest line items in a typical budget: housing, insurance, debt payments, the categories where the real money moves. It mostly didn't hold up. The latte, on its own, was never the difference between a struggling budget and a comfortable one. What actually determined that gap was income, housing costs, and debt. Skipping coffee, it turned out, barely moved the needle on its own. Now here's the part that flips the whole story. For years, anyone who kept buying that daily coffee or ordering delivery or keeping a small subscription was framed as reckless, undisciplined, bad with money. But that person was not failing a test of financial character. In a lot of cases, that small daily comfort was one of the only reliable pleasures inside a budget that had no room left for bigger ones. Buying coffee assumes you believe the bigger financial picture is winnable, that saving $5 a day will eventually matter, because eventually there will be enough left over for it to compound into something real. And for a lot of people, that belief has never been tested by their actual numbers. When rent takes half your paycheck, when one car repair can undo 3 months of saving, the $5 coffee was never competing with a retirement account. It was competing with nothing. It was the only win available that day. Researchers looking into financial behavior under scarcity have shown this pattern again and again. When people are under real financial strain, small, immediate, guaranteed comforts become more rational, not less. A guaranteed $5 of enjoyment today beats a theoretical theoretical, distant, compounding return that depends on years of stability most tight budgets do not have. It's the same logic behind why people in financial stress sometimes make choices that look short-sighted from the outside. The math on a spreadsheet assumes a stable future. Scarcity does not let you assume that. So think about what the Latte Factor was actually measuring all along. It was never measuring discipline. It was measuring how much room a budget already had to work with. A household with steady income, low rent, and no debt can skip a few coffees and actually feel it turn into savings over time. A household with none of that margin can skip every coffee for a year and still be one bad month away from zero. We took that gap in margin and we called it discipline. That is the quiet trick underneath the entire Latte Factor story. It lets people with financial breathing room believe their comfort came from good habits alone, and it lets everyone else look at their own small pleasures and wonder what's wrong with them. What we called financial discipline was often just a budget with enough slack to make small sacrifices actually count. What we called financial carelessness was often just a budget with no slack left to sacrifice from. And this does not stay confined to coffee. The same logic follows people through every part of their financial life. When you watch someone finance a phone instead of saving for it, it is easy to call that bad money management. But if that phone is the thing keeping their job, their childcare, their whole schedule running, then the math looks different from the inside than it does from a stage. Now, to be fair, there is a small real signal buried in all of this. Awareness of small spending is not nothing. Noticing where money quietly leaks can genuinely help someone with the income and stability to act on it. But it is a small lever, not the master key it was sold as. Mostly, the latte was never the real obstacle standing between anyone and financial security. It was a convenient stand-in for a much harder conversation, one about wages and housing costs and how little room modern budgets actually leave for anyone to save their way out. Somewhere out there is someone who bought a coffee this morning on a budget that has no real path to a comfortable retirement no matter what they cut. For that, we called them careless, the person who could not control their spending, when all along they may have been making the one financial decision in their day that was actually guaranteed to pay off. So the next time you feel that flicker of judgment toward yourself or toward someone else over a small purchase that seems unnecessary, maybe try to hold it for a second and ask what the rest of that budget actually looks like. Some of us have enough margin that small habits compound into real wealth. The rest of us are just trying to make it to the next paycheck, one small, well-earned win at a time.